of Kim to realise reunification with the South through the strength of national unity. We were hearing earlier on from our AP correspondent Raphael Wober in Pyongyang that the citizens of the DPRK understandably very much believe that this summit has come about as the results of Kim Jong-un's determination to try and move the peace process forward, and they're looking at him very much as a man of peace. Well, before the Inter-Korean summit resumes, well, it has resumed now, we believe that it's nearly over in fact, but before it resumed this afternoon, the two leaders attended the tree planting ceremony. Tree planted on the demarcation line commemorates the first meeting of the two leaders, as we were just saying. It's a pine tree symbolising peace and prosperity. So we're looking at live pictures coming in and we're waiting for this joint declaration. But before we do, let's take a short break and we'll be back with you in a couple of minutes.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
On April 27, Kim Jong-un is expected to become the first ever DPRK leader to step foot in South Korea when he crosses into the southern side of the demilitarized zone to meet with President Moon Jae-in. It could result in a commitment to denuclearization or an eventual peace agreement, finally ending the official state of war on the peninsula. But two previous inter-Korean summits have failed, and this time the stakes are much higher. Join us on CGTN as we bring you up-to-the-minute coverage of this historic meeting.
Welcome back to live coverage of a day that will live in history, when the leader of the DPRK stepped south and the leader of South Korea stepped north, hand in hand. Well, such a meeting would have been deemed unthinkable just a few months ago. The South Korean president and the leader of the DPRK have sat round a table talking peace, talking armistice, talking denuclearization at the Peace House in the truce village of Panmunjom. This morning's dramatic events saw the first time a DPRK leader crossed the border into the south. Kim Jong-un also invited Moon Jae-in to briefly step across the border and visit the north. The two leaders then entered the Peace House with pomp and circumstance there, walking down the red carpet with dancers and performers and dignitaries from both sides for a 2-hour closed-door meeting. And already talk of peace and reconciliation. Kim said he won't interrupt Moon's early morning sleep anymore, a comment taken to mean there would be no more testing of missiles. Well, today's discussions are already being written up into a joint declaration which is due to be delivered to the waiting media and to the world at large any moment now. We'll be looking at those events live as they happen right here on CGTN.
우리가 잃어버린 11년 세월이 아깝지 않을 정도로 아까 말씀드린 것처럼 정말 수시로 만나서 걸린 문제를 풀어나가고, 그래서 오늘 이 자리에서 평화 번영, 북남관계가 정말 새로운 역사가 씌워지는 그런 순간에 이런 출발점에 서서
전 세계의 눈과 귀가 여기 판문점에 쏠려 있습니다. 우리 남북의 국민들 또 해외 동포들이 거는 기대도 아주 큽니다. 그만큼 우리 두 사람 어깨가 무겁다고.
Well, across the peninsula, Koreans from both sides have been watching the events unfold with a mixture of amazement, hope and in some cases cynicism. In the south, hope is high that rhetoric will soon turn to action.
I hope Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un work together to prevent another war like the Korean War. My generation has been through a lot of pain due to political chaos. However, I hope our next generation will be able to live without experiencing the same pain.
I want to live in a country where strong security is guaranteed, so that nothing threatens my life, and where I can live without any concern about security and have peace of mind.
And in Pyongyang, residents are just as hopeful, certain that their leader's intention is to maintain the peace process to the end.
I saw the news today in the Workers' Daily about our respected Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un setting off to go to the North-South Summit on the south side. This meeting is coming after more than 10 years, and I hope it's successful.
Our respected Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un, already in his New Year's address this year, stressed the importance of improving relations between the North and South.
OK, let's return now to these live pictures coming into us from the truce village Panmunjom. We're waiting for the joint declaration to be read out from both leaders, DPRK's Kim Jong-un and the ROK's Moon Jae-in. They're making a joint statement any moment now. Of course, this comes after the first meeting in 11 years between the top leaders of the two countries, a meeting that was just unthinkable just a few moments ago. They've sat round a table for most of the day, talking peace, talking armistice, talking denuclearization, and they've planted a tree, or rather they've been nurturing a tree that was planted back in 2007 by their predecessors. They have been seen to laugh and joke and stroll around the grounds of the Peace House. It looks like it's a lovely day there in Panmunjom. They seem to be enjoying the weather and enjoying what is a great atmosphere there. We've been hearing from our correspondents all in Pyongyang and also at Panmunjom, who have been talking to us about how wonderful the atmosphere is. Jack Barton, you're still on the phone with us. It has been a wonderful day, hasn't it? I would imagine a few drinks will be consumed tonight by you journalists.
No, we're going to be working right through the night, unfortunately, but I'm sure many South Koreans will be consuming a few drinks tonight. And I've heard many people are eating the same cold noodles, the naengmyeon, that the leaders will be eating from Pyongyang today. We've even heard that in Pyongyang, that restaurant where the noodle machine came from is absolutely packed out. If you want to have dinner there tonight, you're going to have to wait a couple of hours on the queue outside. It really is, you know, I can certainly speak for South Korea. People have been swept up by this. What they've seen today, this incredible rapport between these two leaders. We don't know how much of it is real or staged, but there definitely seems to be an ease between them and an ability to talk. That is critical for getting a deal done. Many people were impressed with this, still skeptical, but not as skeptical as they were yesterday, that's for sure.
After the banquet, do we know what happens? Is there a symbolic goodbye? Are we going to watch as a bit of theatre as Kim Jong-un steps back over the line, back into his own country?
Well, there will be a little bit of theatre, but in the terms of a short movie. They'll be watching a sort of movie in the theme of the spring, of the sort of the reunification spirit after that dinner, at which the First Ladies of both the DPRK and South Korea will attend, along with Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, who we've seen at the proceedings today and who was down here for the Winter Olympics. One of the people who really broke the ice. A lot of South Koreans really took to her, and she helped give this diplomatic momentum. So they'll be sitting down to watching a movie. We don't know the details of the farewell, but judging by everything else we've seen today, there's no doubt going to be some ceremony involved.
Well, yes, let's talk about Kim Yo-jong for a minute, because she has been a pivotal character in getting these talks arranged, hasn't she?
Oh, she has, and the surprising thing is, in a way, is that she's the head of the Department of Propaganda that was putting out many of those vitriolic reports over the last few years, you know, threatening to turn Washington and Seoul to ashes. So it's been a real pivot. When she turned up in person, everybody thought she was very charismatic, she was likable. A lot of South Koreans really took to her, and we've heard from Kim Jong-un talking to Moon Jae-in today how impressed his sister was with the speed train, and how Kim was a little bit worried if Moon visited that the public transport wouldn't live up to sort of South Korean standards. Clearly she's come back impressed and is definitely helping. You know, all of this is helping in this diplomatic momentum, perhaps more so than what's actually on paper.
I was talking earlier on to our studio guest, Wong Chong, about Kim Jong-un as a person and as a diplomat. Can you ever see a day, if this opening up that's begun today, if this gains momentum, and can you ever see a day in years to come when Kim Jong-un will be at these summits and forums and meetings with the likes of Theresa May, the likes of Emmanuel Macron, the likes of Angela Merkel? Can you see him stepping up to the plate?
It all depends on what comes out in that announcement, which will lead to, further meetings with Donald Trump. In turn, will lead to further meetings, and if real momentum can be gained here, because it really hinges on denuclearization, the normalization of relations, the normalization of diplomatic relations, which would essentially see the DPRK emerge out into the wider world to becoming part of the mainstream again. But if that process does go on track, there's absolutely nothing to stop that from happening, because that would be the natural end result.
Jack Barton, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, AP's senior video journalist Raphael Wober is in Pyongyang and talked to CGTN earlier about how people in the DPRK are reacting to today's historic events.
First of all, I can't overemphasize the sensitivity of this moment here. That underlines the historic nature of such a kind of meeting. Of course, there have been the past summits, but this is the first for DPRK's current Supreme Leader, Kim Jong-un. And the sensitivity here with which people must approach this, really, I cannot overemphasize that. I think that for the first time this morning, there was a report coming out saying that the DPRK leader had set off, and that's what people know here so far. I had a chance to go out on the streets of Pyongyang just this morning, trying to ask people about it, and certainly as is often the case here, the message is very consistent. People are ready to say that they know that their leader has emphasized the improvement, reconciliation of inter-Korean ties since his New Year's address this year at the beginning of January, and they hope that things will get better. So these are the kind of things that people are able to see and say here on the streets of Pyongyang.
Well, no country has been watching events unfold more than the United States. Earlier, we spoke to our correspondent Kevin McAleese in Washington, D.C.
Just an hour ago, we had an official statement from the White House in relation to this inter-Korean summit, in which it says we are hopeful that talks will achieve progress towards a future of peace and prosperity for the entire Korean peninsula. This is the important bit. The United States appreciates the close coordination with our ally, the Republic of Korea, and looks forward to continuing robust discussions in preparation for the planned meeting between Donald J. Trump and Kim Jong-un in the coming weeks. We're no clearer on exactly when that will happen or where that venue will be. We know several are under discussion at the moment, but effectively this summit is really being seen as a foundation for those talks. If this summit goes well, there's a greater chance of those talks going ahead, be they later this month or in early June. Donald Trump, once again this week, has been talking about his priorities, what he wants in a deal, and he says he wants all of North Korea's nuclear weapons gone. That's it. He drew a line under that. Those are the terms. Of course, his administration is looking at what denuclearization is and how it is defined by North Korea to see if the two will marry up before this meeting can even go ahead. Critics of Donald Trump have been saying that he's given the DPRK too much room already, and that a lot of the promises coming out of Pyongyang can be easily reversed. But then on the flip side, it's a two-way street, of course, and this Trump administration isn't afraid to tear up deals and pull itself out of international agreements. It'll be interesting to see how that sits with Kim Jong-un as well as we approach this.
Well, Russia is praising the dialogue between the DPRK and South Korea and says it hopes the summit will help prevent military confrontation. Moscow is calling for the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and says it would be willing to join in wider negotiations. CGTN's Julia Lyubova reports now from Moscow.
Moscow says it welcomes the summit between the DPRK and South Korea. Russian Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev said that Moscow hails any dialogue between Pyongyang and Seoul. He also said that Moscow hopes that a military scenario can be avoided on the Korean peninsula. Moscow hopes that the summit will improve the situation in the region. Russia is calling for denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and says it's important to start a dialogue. Moscow calls for Pyongyang to stop its missile tests and at the same time calls on South Korea and the United States to stop their joint military drills. Russia also welcomes a possible meeting between the DPRK's leader and the US president and hopes it would give start to the denuclearization process. However, Moscow said previously that it would not offer for Donald Trump to meet Kim Jong-un on the Russian territory. Moscow says it shouldn't interfere or get involved in such a meeting in any way. Russia says it would be happy to join wider negotiations on the situation on the Korean peninsula, together with China and Japan in the future. Julia Lyubova, CGTN, Moscow.
Well, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying says Beijing is glad for the historic meeting between Moon and Kim.
From the TV, we have been following how the DPRK and ROK leaders are crossing the national border. This is a historical moment, and we really applaud for such a historical step forward and for their political will and resolve. We appreciate it. And the Chinese government sincerely hopes that this historical meeting could generate more results. In China, we have a saying that no matter what obstacles we have met, when we meet again, we will renew our friendship as brothers. We hope we could take this opportunity in Panmunjom to explore peace and stability in the long run in the peninsula.
Well, this is only the third time the leaders of the ROK and the DPRK have met. Let's take a look back now at the previous two inter-Korean summits and how they affected relations between the two sides.
The first two summits were held in 2000 and 2007. The first was held in 2000 from June the 13th to 15th in Pyongyang. Kim Dae-jung, then President of the Republic of Korea, arrived at Pyongyang Sunam International Airport when he was greeted by then DPRK leader Kim Jong-il and a military honor guard. On the last day of the talks, the two leaders issued the June 15th joint declaration. 2 months later, in August, after more than 50 years of separation, some members of the separated families in the north and south were finally able to briefly meet again in Pyongyang and Seoul. Kim Dae-jung received a Nobel Peace Prize in 2000 for his efforts to bring peace to the peninsula. The second summit was held in 2007 from October the 2nd to the 4th, also in Pyongyang, between Kim Jong-il and Roh Moo-hyun, Kim Dae-jung's successor.
To bring you live pictures now of the two leaders sitting down to give their statement.
From now on, we start such a meeting about the declaration. Now let's exchange this declaration and shake our hands. The Panmunjom Declaration, which is historically important, is coming to an end.
Now let's move to the room of peace. Now, Mr. Moon Jae-in from ROK and Kim Jong-un from DPRK is officially launching the Panmunjom Joint Declaration. Distinguished people from North Korea and South Korea and all over the world, Mr. Kim Jong-un and I have been working quite hard to achieve for peace and stability in the Korea Peninsula, and we are gathering here today for that purpose. From now on, the peninsula will not see war again. We will move towards the pathway of peace. In the past years, because of separation, our peninsula has undergone a lot of suffering, but we are convinced that we can move past such an obstacle. That's why we're standing here. Today, together with Mr. Kim Jong-un, we bear in mind the peaceful mission of the peninsula, and we have reached a lot of agreements and consensus. For denuclearization, we have built our consensus. This would be the starting point for the new chapter in the peninsula, and we hope that in the future, both nations on the peninsula could work closely together and march forward with the same goal. Also, South Korea will observe such a joint declaration and the armistice to end any war potential or possibility in this peninsula. And also, we're going to safeguard international order. And also, for the land we are standing on or in the air, there will not be any sign of conflict. And we are going to move further to explore new mechanisms for avoiding any military confrontation or conflicts. We believe that the Korea Peninsula will not be armed with weapons, and we will avoid any potential conflicts that may happen occasionally to safeguard the peace in the two nations. And I am now taking this opportunity to announce that for Kim Jong-un, the top leader of North Korea, I am paying my highest tribute and honor to you. As we know, we are the masters of our own destiny. We need to work together with the international community to safeguard the peace in the peninsula. Together with Kim Jong-un, we have been holding candid discussions, and at any time we will keep in touch. We're never going to repeat the historical mistakes. So, dear people from the peninsula and all of the world, I declare that I will work with Kim Jong-un to work for peace, development of the peninsula. And we're going to work unyieldingly. The top leaders in both nations will have close and frequent communication to strive for development of our nations, and we're going to build more extensive platform of communication, and also we are going to settle such families who have been departed from each other for years. And we're also going to make measures to build some joint offices. Here, we're deciding that we're going to sustain the former agreement so that the peninsula will embrace a new situation. And we're also going to attempt to establish some communication office in each other's land. Today, with Kim Jong-un, we decided to work for denuclearization and the development of mankind, and we are actually ushering in a new chapter. And also, thanks to the efforts made by Kim Jong-un and the South Korea part, we believe the peninsula will gonna see a better future. Up until now, no leader in the peninsula has ever declared such a declaration before. So, again, I want to pay my tribute to Kim Jong-un for your efforts. Thank you. Distinguished guests and our compatriots and friends from overseas, today with Mr. Moon Jae-in, we are gathering in Panmunjom to open a new chapter for our history. First of all, for this successful meeting and summit, I want to give my sincere thanks to all of the friends preparing for today. And also, I want to give my gratitude to the people receiving us with hospitality here. We feel that we are truly family members. So I want to thank the South Korean people. DPRK and ROK have renewed our cooperation, and of course it takes a long time in history. But when we face each other, we realize that these two nations can never be separated. We share the same bonds, and we belong to the same nationality. I can deeply feel that. DPRK and ROK enjoy geographical distance, and also we belong to the same nationality. We are not enemies. We hope that at an early date, for the Korean nationality, we could encourage peaceful development for all of the people. I have crossed such a borderline, and I come here. We hope that the peninsula could hear more signs of peace. And on top of that, we're going to take a lot of effective measures so that peace and prosperity will settle down here in the Korea Peninsula, and we will have a new chapter of development. We will also take some tangible measures to implement the above-mentioned declaration and agreement. I and Moon Jae-in, during our meetings, have discussed a lot of topics and issues. And we have published the Panmunjom Declaration together. And I know that the whole world has been following closely on us. Here in Panmunjom, we will learn from the history, and we will not repeat the mistakes before. We will keep such candid communication and treat each other as equals. We will generate a series of fruitful results during this meeting. I hope what I'm doing today could be done by more Korean people. And we hope that Panmunjom would be a good sign of peace Now, let DPRK and ROK people join our hands together and realize harmonious development in real sense. So, distinguished guests, as long as we could work as one, I think we could do anything. DPRK and ROK will work together and make efforts to pursue the common development of two nations. The history is not created out of nothing. It was brought about with the perspiration of people of all generations. Today, to embrace the real peace in the Korea Peninsula, we need to shoulder our responsibilities due on us, and we need common efforts. And based on such efforts, we need to walk resolutely along this path. Of course, we're going to meet and encounter a lot of rains and heavy winds, but those are necessary difficulties for us to truly pursue a bright future. We are going to rise up to all sorts of challenges. And in the near future, if we take a look back at today, I think it's going to be a beautiful memory. As long as we cooperate and march forward together, I think we're going to take steps to embrace a hopeful future. Today, the Panmunjom Joint Declaration carries a lot of expectations of our people. Meanwhile, we hope that the declaration today could offer some good answers to the questions on your head. And also for the people who are closely followed about this summit, and for the supportive people around the whole world, I pay my gratitude again to all of you. For the journalists and media friends, thank you.
And there we go, ending with an historic handshake. We've just been hearing from the leaders of the DPRK and the ROK. They signed their joint declaration, and then they both gave a speech full of rousing rhetoric of peace. Moon Jae-in talked about this being the starting point of a new chapter, talking about taking the peninsula towards peace and ending what is an unnatural state of war between them, talking about the lack of weapons, talking about that the peninsula will not be armed with weapons. Kim Jong-un there also discussing similar topics, saying that he has renewed cooperation, renewed energy to end the conflict between the two nations. He says that the two nations share the same bond and that they are, in fact, the same nation. They share the same nationality. Let's speak now to Jack Barton, who is in Panmunjom, has been listening to that speech. Jack, as their speech began, we were handed here in the studio the actual Panmunjom Declaration for Peace, Prosperity and Unification. So we were reading what they were signing. I presume you got a copy of that too?
Yeah, that's right. And of course, you have to read right to the very end to get to denuclearization. It is in there. They didn't mention it, probably because Moon is aware this will also, large parts of it, be replayed back in the DPRK. And since Kim Jong-un didn't mention denuclearization in the state media declarations, Moon carefully being diplomatic here, not to make a big deal out of it in the public comments, but it is there in the declaration at the end, a joint commitment to the denuclearization of the peninsula. There's no time frame, there's no details, but this is likely to be enough to then propel things forward to a face-to-face meeting between Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump. But there's also other important elements in there. The need to provide humanitarian aid to alleviate some of the suffering created by the war, the need to move forward with a peace agreement. That's clearly in the declaration, and it's talking about the need to work with the United States, China, the DPRK and South Korea to achieve that final peace agreement, ending the war, and really importantly for a lot of Koreans, reunification of families, or the chance for families that were split apart by that war.
Jack, I just want to interrupt you a second. I want to come on to some of those points in a moment, but I just want to return to this point about denuclearization, because this is something that we weren't really expecting, were we? We thought that it would be a very tough sell to persuade Kim Jong-un to go down the path of denuclearization, but here it is in black and white. This is hugely significant, isn't it?
It is, but it's also the tough sell is still ahead. We have to remember that all of the major nuclear powers, not all of them, India and Pakistan haven't signed on to the non-proliferation treaty that most of the big nuclear powers signed back during the Cold War, and they've all still got nuclear weapons. They're all committed to denuclearization. So a commitment to denuclearization doesn't mean you're going to destroy all of your nuclear weapons next Monday. In fact, even if they tried to do it in a hurry, it would take many years to do so. It's a complicated process. This is really just signifying that the DPRK wants to normalize relations. It does want to go down this path, but it'll still be decided. Does this go through the six-party talks? Is it another format? What will the timeline be? We're not really going to get a grip of many of these details until that expected meeting with US President Donald Trump happens.
Exactly. We are getting a sign, though, that the United States is involved with that in point number 3 and in point 4. In point 3, it says that they are actively pursuing the option of having a trilateral meeting between the two Koreas and the United States. And in point 4, the point about denuclearization, it talks about using the international community to bring about this result. Remarkable again that that a trilateral meeting is so important to them on a day that really is a day about Korea itself.
Well, it's important to remember that the signing of that armistice was actually between China, the DPRK and the United States, representing the United Nations forces, which included South Korea, but South Korea didn't actually sign it. So that, that is seen as the foundation documentation here, and even though that's a military document and this would be a political document, it's seen as important as bringing on those original players back on board. And of course, it is the US that has been putting the option of preemptive military strikes on the table. A lot of this meeting is about ensuring that doesn't happen. China is the big neighbor. It is a big regional strategic power that is pivotal to these talks as well. So a lot of what happens here, in a sense, is meaningless in the broader picture unless the United States and China is brought on board.
It says here that they want to bring to an end the current unnatural state of armistice and establish a robust peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. So we're talking there about the border going, can't we? The border being destroyed. While we're talking, we're looking at live pictures coming in of Kim Jong-un's wife, who is crossing the border or has crossed the border to attend this banquet this evening. So we'll just look at pictures of that while, Jack, you take me up on that point. Could we see a day fairly shortly then when there isn't a border, that Kim Jong-un's wife doesn't have to cross a border to go to South Korea, that she can just walk across?
Yeah, it is possible. It's not going to happen anytime soon. There's perhaps a few years down the track. There's a long process. Even physically pulling this border apart that spans the entire peninsula is 4 kilometers wide, and it is mined from one end to the other. It is minefields on both sides. There's anti-tank walls. I mean, the physical barrier itself would take many years to pull down, but the idea of at least first pulling heavy weapons back. It's estimated the DPRK has enough heavy artillery, things like Grad rockets, long-range artillery, that could decimate Seoul within a day. A greater metropolitan Seoul has tens of millions of people. Pull those heavy weapons back, pull them back on the southern side as well. Take that tension away, the threat of the violence coming out again, because again, the war is not over. Every now and again it flares up in real term. We saw in 2010 the sinking of a Navy ship led to 46 lost lives. A couple of years last year, 2 soldiers lost their legs to landmines along that Funty, you can see just behind me when DPRK soldiers snuck across and planted those mines. We have the shelling of islands, civilian deaths. Hundreds of people have died since the end of those hostilities in 1953. It would be great for everybody here, no doubt, if that could come to an end and they could have a mutual sense of security that really makes this unessential to have this highly militarized. It's the irony. It's called the demilitarized zone, but of course it is the most militarized frontier on Earth.
Kim Jong-un was talking in his speech about it being one Korea, about there being one nation. Do you think that there will ever become a day when that will be the case? And if so, who do you think will be in charge?
Well, you know, that's a long process, that's a long way away, and it's clearly not going to be the DPRK that's in charge. But it would take some sort of unexpected event in Pyongyang for that unification to come about in any sort of hurry, and even then it probably wouldn't. There would be some other government installed, something would happen. But they are taking the first concrete steps today, and ironically it's sort of in the other direction, because today we saw them formally recognizing each other as countries for the first time. In the past they've always seen the other side as illegitimate, but today we saw South Korea's foreign minister here. Well, you only see that if you're dealing with another country. We saw the honor guard and the reviewing the troops. All of the kind of state ceremony we only see when one country that acknowledges the other meets the other country. It's still uncomfortable in Seoul and Pyongyang. They still like to see this, of course, as one country with the other side being illegitimate. But there's a recognition here for unification to one day happen, for that dream to be kept alive. First of all, they really have to start viewing each other as independent countries and diplomatically recognizing and perhaps respecting each other as such.
Well, we're just looking at pictures of the two leaders, Jack, with their wives. Ri So-ju has crossed the border. There she is with her husband. Hungry, I would imagine, by now, ready to go in for these cold noodles. I just want to look back at one of the things that strikes me in this peace, prosperity and unification document, the Panmunjom document declaration that we've seen. And it says here that South and North Korea, the DPRK, affirm the principle of determining the destiny of the Korean nation on their own accord. Am I reading too much into this, Jack, or is that an indication that they don't want involvement from the United States?
They'd like to get to a position where they don't have involvement from anybody. Moon Jae-in has been saying this since coming to office, that it should be inter-Korean dialogue that determines the destiny of Korea. Unfortunately, for the first few years, or for the first year, he was sort of snubbed at every corner by Kim Jong-un and Pyongyang. Clearly it's become a necessity, since Washington wasn't picking up the phone, to hold these talks first. But the relationship has blossomed well beyond anybody's expectations. I'm sure Kim Jong-un as well. And this has been the message we've been hearing from the two Koreas all along. They want to determine their own destiny. Perhaps the momentum of this catching them by surprise, they realize there now is an opportunity to more determine their own destiny. And if they really can work out, a mutual respect, a peaceful understanding, demilitarizing the DMZ, and ultimately denuclearization, then yes, perhaps a day will come when there is no need for US troops to be stationed on the Korean Peninsula anymore, and that Koreas can determine their own security policy. But that day, of course, is still a long way away.
Okay, Jack, one final question from me before you head off to try and find some cold noodles for yourself. I'm an old man. I started in this business back in 1989, and one of the first stories I was involved with was the Berlin Wall coming down. Today feels a little bit like that in terms of atmosphere, in terms of energy, in terms of hope. Is it like that? Is it similar? Or is this a much lengthier process? And we seem to have lost Jack Barton just at the time when I was asking him a question I really wanted to get answered. But never mind, we will turn now to our studio guest, Jong, who is still with us here. He's a senior fellow from the Chaha Institute think tank. What do you make of this declaration? It's got a lot of stuff in it, hasn't it? But particularly the denuclearization things. Are you surprised to see a whole paragraph on denuclearization?
I'm not surprised. In general, this is a very candid, frank document. It is productive. In general, it is a good document. But on the, they mentioned, on the title, they mentioned peace, prosperity, and unification. But he didn't put the denuclearization in the title. That means these two Koreas, Inter-Korea Summit, pay more attention to one nation, to peace between the two countries, more than the nuclear weapons issue. But the last paragraph is really the emphasis that the whole world pay attention to, and they didn't have any promise to abandon nuclear weapons. They just said they confirmed the common goal of realizing through complete denuclearization. Common goal might be 1 year, it might be 10 years, it might be a long way. So that means these two sides has discussed about that. They noticed that that is not a issue between the two Koreas. It is an issue including several other countries. So they themselves cannot solve this issue, but so they make it unclear and just see the common goal. It is a careful wording.
Yes, it is, but it is a declaration of intent, isn't it?
Yes.
It does say that this is the path that they want to go down, even though they are recognising that it will take years to come. There's also other elements in there that you were saying earlier on you thought would happen, reconnecting blood relatives, because behind all of this political rhetoric that we've seen over the years and the threat of nuclear war, etc., 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 there are ordinary families that have been split up because some of them are one side of the border and some of them are the other. Are we going to see their individual heartaches coming to an end now?
Yeah, it will come. It is a very important sector among the talks, because peace is very expensive. You can achieve it not only from the up-level dialogue. Mr. Kim and Mr. Moon cannot make it by themselves. They need the dialogue from different levels. One important side is reunification of separated families. They meet with each other, and after the media's coverage, people will be touched by that, and then they realize that peace is so important. They cannot have war anymore. That is one. That is the other point, that they promised to have a dialogue on military. In May, some general will join. So that is a highest level dialogue that will pave the way for the crisis management. In Korea Peninsula, incident may happen anytime. During the military exercise, if some people visited the north, they may die due to the accident. Anything may happen in Peninsula. So what is most important is that how to control the crisis before it becoming serious. So this kind of dialogue among people, among the liaison office and the hotlines, and plus the military dialogue on general level. That means from the grassroots to the media, to the public, and they all done that.
Okay, Wang Jong, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, you've been watching a special programme here on CGTN from me, Jeff Moody, in Beijing. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
More than 4 billion people live across this vast continent called Asia, and we are telling their stories. On this edition, Patrolling the Desert, meet Jordan's camel-riding desert police, tasked to guard a vast tribal territory and maintain peace and stability.